Hello, Mary Tess Rooney. How are you?
Yay, Shanti Joy Gold. Here we are. I'm so excited.
Ye-
Season 1.
Yes, we're bringing season 1 to a close, and I can't imagine anyone I'd rather be doing this with. You were with me at the very beginning, and I remember my first words were something like, "Welcome to the podcast for women with 3 names." And here we are again. You're now here with me on my 3rd episode that we've done together, and every one of them is just so close to my heart. And I'm just grateful for you.
Thank you. I am so grateful to be here, and I'm so grateful for you. And I'm so grateful that you created this podcast so that individuals who are feeling marginalized or underrepresented or just trying to connect with their people and find their voice and find that empathy and kindness and relatability that is out there, that you are bringing this to life, and you have brought so many different contributors and brave, vulnerable individuals to this podcast. And then you also have this very unique spin of the stories we haven't shared related to how to empower ourselves with careers. I just love that it's not just everyone has their unique story, but how do you move more fluidly with your story and make sure that you're showing up in your best version in that career realm? Do you want to share anything more about where your initial thoughts kind of brought this idea to life and then how you've seen it evolved over the past 24? This is 24 episodes, right?
It's crazy. Yes, it
That's
is.
awesome.
Yeah. So, for anyone who might be landing on the podcast for the first time with this episode, just to describe the podcast, it's a campfire style interview series where underrepresented people talk about the extra layers we navigate as we wind our way into the already complicated career landscape. My story in terms of navigating my career didn't become evident to me until fairly recently. I realized after finally taking a little bit of a pause and a reflection, I had a great career and there wasn't necessarily trauma associated with my journey through my career as a gay woman, but there were definitely some that is not a normal thing to go through moments. And some of them were clumsy and some of them took a lot of energy and some of them felt very isolating and alone. And I thought, wow, like, interesting. I just kept my head down and kept moving and pushed through. If I was doing that and not aware and therefore not really sharing the story fully with other people, how many other people might be out there in similar situations? What's the opportunity to create a space where these stories can be told in a warm glow of a campfire kind of a way so that people can really just kick back and gather in community and learn from each other, feel less alone, feel more seen, hear stories about ways other people navigated. And you mentioned it, so vulnerable in the shares beyond anything I could have imagined. The good, the bad, the ugly, all of it. And how do we learn from that so that our journeys maybe can be a little bit smoother, more linear, more joyful, and see how our outsiderness might be converted into our greatest strength, which is really ultimately what I feel like I saw over and over again with the episodes with the guests.
I love it. Since this episode is all about recapping the magicalness that surfaced during those episodes, can you walk us through what surprised you? What took your breath away? What are the episodes that you feel like either you personally or someone reached out to you and said, "Thank you. This was a key takeaway for me"?
Yeah. There are a few, and I do want to also just frame it as some of these stories that you're going to hear now and throughout the episode are stories from people actually in their career. Oh, here was a moment in my career that was defining and how it unfolded. And in many cases, the stories are more the person's story arc. Because who we are as humans and who we are at work, it's all wrapped up with each other, right? So a lot of times we were hearing the story of the person's journey in their life and then how that brought them into their career. So if you're just landing here for the first time, you might hear a story and think that's got nothing to do with career, but you can be sure it does. It all comes together. And this has never been a podcast when we talk about career about spreadsheets or systems. It's really about the human journeys. Having said that, one of the moments that took my breath away was with Justin Ayers. He's a gay man He told a story about going to visit a dermatologist in the DC area. In the process of being in that vulnerable state where you're wearing the paper gown and you're in the middle of an exam, he was telling a story to the doctor. And in the telling of the story, it became clear that Justin is gay. At which point, the dermatologist stopped the exam, walked away from Justin, removed his gloves, was refusing to touch him in any way, and walked out the door. That is something that in my wildest dreams I would never have imagined. This is fairly recently. And for Justin, obviously, it was complete shutdown. You just don't know what to do in that moment.
Yeah.
But as he reflected on it, he had been an entrepreneur creating spaces for the LGBTQ community for some time. And he had heard over the years this theme of where can I find a doctor that makes me feel safe? And it wasn't until that moment that he experienced it himself and he thought, okay, now I understand what's been going on. And went on to found a company called Equality MD, which is a telehealth platform for the LGBT community and the specific needs of the community. So completely transformed it into the most amazing thing. But that moment in that doctor's office is not a story I ever expected to hear.
No. Every time you share it or I hear it, it's like I get this horrible pit in my stomach and I get goosebumps. Your breath is taken away. You're like, how we can treat someone so inhumanely.
Yeah.
It makes you also wonder, how often is this happening? And how many other people needed to hear this story because maybe they were in a similar situation where they felt shame or they felt judgment or they felt betrayal. I want to talk about betrayal.
Yeah.
What I love about this podcast and the stories is that you're surfacing them. And just as Justin experienced, you hear these things occurring, but until it becomes a personal experience, it's really hard to relate. But the more that we can surface these stories and the more we can socialize that this is happening, the better chance we have for sympathy or empathy or expansion in our mind. What are some other stories that surfaced during these 23 episodes that helped gain a new perspective?
Lisa Hurley is a Black woman. She was getting on a bus with some coworkers. And as she got on the bus driver said to her, "You need to sit in the back of the bus." So she was sure she heard him wrong, so she continued to move toward her seat, at which point she heard again, "No, you need to sit in the back of the bus." There was a dispatcher who happened to also be Black who witnessed this, intervened on Lisa's behalf and said, "Ma'am, you can sit wherever you want." In the meantime, her coworkers said nothing. So she was really left hanging out there on her own. And just to add layers to it, insult to injury, some of the coworkers then later that day gaslighted her essentially. And in the replaying and rediscussion of it said, no, I don't know if it was really that bad. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. And so the layers of number one, it happening, number two, people not intervening in the moment,
Yeah.
and number three, the gaslighting, that's about as intense as it gets. And I said to her on that episode, there's one other story that reminds me of that pit in the stomach, the disbelief that I had in hearing her tell the story. And it was Justin's story. I mean, it shouldn't ever be a conversation. It's impossible to believe on so many levels, except that it happened.
How brave and vulnerable they are for sharing. And also, you have a very strong listenership following. If you go to Listen Notes, you are in the top 10% globally, which is huge.
Crazy.
And so, for as hard as it is to hear these stories that make you literally feel sick or disheartened that this can happen, it also makes you go, okay, I'm so glad that this is getting exposed because we don't know how to do better until we know better. And so that is the silver lining in this. These stories coming forward, it gives all of us a better chance to manage any situation, right? Because you have to imagine, just as you and I were shocked, if we've heard this scenario, we're better equipped to go, oh my goodness, I know someone who went through this, and I now know better that this cannot go unlooked. Or most certainly, They cannot be gaslit. We really do need to protect our future individuals with that empathy and that kindness and that heart. Any other episodes that you want to call out or mention?
One is Ruth Rathblot, who has a disability. She was born without one fully formed hand. She hid her hand for 25 years. And that was another one of those where I'm like, okay, there's going to be a coda. That can't be the true full story. No, she fully hid it for 25 years. And Ruth and I have developed a really strong connection. I think while our actual details of our stories are quite different, there's a lot of shared experiences and feelings and takeaways. She was so fearful of judgment, of rejection, of not belonging, that one small act one day when someone stared at her hand too long and she chose in the moment to hide it turned into day 2, turned into day 3, turned into 25 years. And the amount of energy and loneliness and exhaustion associated with that was pretty intense. Equally inspirational to hear her talk about how she unhid and created an entire unhiding movement.
How do you accept yourself? And then how do you feel accepted? And then how do you become brave and vulnerable and just completely flip the tables on that whole conversation, which is what Ruth did, right? And really step forward and create a movement out of her personal challenges and pain and fear and lack of acceptance. That's beautiful. And you can see that in so many of the stories. You and I have talked or debriefed after an episode, and you might highlight something that really resonated with you. And I might go, oh, that was powerful. But you know what struck me? And each individual is showing up with their own experiences. And in a moment in time where they might need to latch onto something. And so I love that you can also revisit these 23 episodes leading up to this wrap up. And each time you might hear something uniquely different depending on where we are in time and space.
Yeah, and you said something to me as we were prepping for this episode, which I really appreciated, because honestly, I'm so close to this. Has been such an amazing journey for me to do this first season, and all of the episodes are like my kids, and there's so much that I take away from each episode. And so I'm thinking, how am I going to recap this season? And you made the point, everyone is going to take away something different, and that's part of the beauty of it. Almost like if a musician writes a song and then you give the song up to the world, what matters is each individual person's interpretation and takeaways. And I appreciated you freeing me from this pressure that I put on myself to try to summarize everything, because it's honestly impossible. In a good way.
Good way. And in a really great way.
Yeah.
You've already spoken about a couple themes that have surfaced organically just in this conversation. What are the standout themes that listeners should, again, feel connected to?
I mentioned it before, but it bears repeating. Underneath all of it is this fear of judgment, fear of rejection, fear of not belonging. And it manifests in a variety of ways. One of them is putting up walls and actively hiding or masking. In some cases, it can't be hidden, but it can. Ruth can hide her hand, right? There are ways to downplay it. I mean, Sandy Cassano, she's Asian, but you can downplay your Asianness. And she did. She downplayed it. She didn't show up in that identity fully. Black guests have done the same thing. Farrah Hudson Brown, it was interesting because her hiding, she didn't even realize she was doing it. It snuck up on her. She's a Black woman who was showing up for work, and due to her upbringing, her mom was part of the civil rights movement, and just some cautions that were a part of what she learned, without really knowing she was doing it, decided, well, I'm just going to show up and try to be pleasant and not rock the boat and be agreeable and just fade into the bigger picture in that way. She did that over time, and she over time also experienced some microaggressions related to being Black. And by the time we met, because we worked together, all of this had really chipped away at her, not in the good ways, right? But in the wearing down ways. While I was privileged to get to know her, I could see who she was as a person, and this kind of bright, shining, spunky person. And then when it came to work, she immediately flipped the switch and got very much into transactional mode. There was even a little defensiveness by the time I met her, which was many years into what I described. And so I was fortunate to be able to have a conversation with her while we were still working together to talk through the observation and guide her toward her own seeing of, wow, I really have gotten to a place where I'm shut down.
Mm.
And what's the potential of me resetting and bringing my full self to work? And she talked about, still one of my favorite quotes, realizing the opportunity to be the salt and add the flavor at work. That when you radiate your best, you bring out the best in other people, and you can open much deeper, much more meaningful interactions and ways of being present for yourself and for others. There are so many ways that we can hide within plain sight to some degree.
Yeah.
And all of that takes extra energy
Mm.
and is fairly exhausting.
And just that kind of how different situations can really take that spark and take that light out of us if we're not careful and if we're
Yeah.
not mindful of releasing those fears and saying, I want to come forward anyway. And then also releasing that exhaustion of trying to show up in a way that maybe appeases others but doesn't feel aligned.
Yeah, there's a million versions of this, right? So in my case, I was able to hide and talked about this with Eduardo Placer. He's a gay man, but he is in a position where he could hide it if he wanted to. And that is a privilege in many ways to be able to hide. And the decision to choose to live a lie, which he talked about, which I talked about, is a fairly devastating internal decision. I hid my relationship with my now wife for over 10 years at work, and there's a couple episodes where there are stories you can go back to, and ultimately got to a point where I just said, I don't care. There's no way I want to or can continue with this. So a breaking point. There are a couple other themes too. I just mentioned Eduardo, and this came up on a few different episodes. This tendency, because we're outsiders, to then feel that need to overperform. He said, I felt like I had to be extraordinary because the moment that someone found out that I was gay, I would go from like A+ to maybe B- or C+. So there is this, okay, I'm going to overreach, I'm going to overperform, I'm going to overextend myself to compensate for not being on the same playing field, knowing that I need to make up for deficit of some sort, which I think I felt. And I do think, I actually wondered this prepping for the episode, in my case, that there was definitely that. And potentially a little bit of a distraction. Hey, if I'm getting the A, if I'm crushing budget, if I'm doing all of these things, it's like, hey, distraction, look over here, look over here, look over here.
Mm.
And then there's another way it shows up. Caramel Faye, who is a former Women's World Cup captain, talked about the pressure that she felt being the only to represent. She was speaking about it largely as being a woman in the professional sporting world. And at the same time, she's a Black Polynesian queer woman. And the pressure that she felt to represent, and she felt unworthy in a lot of ways, as she described it. It was a lot of pressure, and it put her in some kind of dark places where she had to reconcile for herself, why me? Am I the right person for the job? That extra internal dialogue is just very draining. And in her case, she described it as being very, very dark.
Well, self-doubt it's exhausting. It's also very painful. And you get on that internal dialogue track and it's really hard to shift out of it sometimes. Again, this whole podcast, I love the stories we haven't shared because the more these stories become socially out there, then the more we can go, oh, you know what? I do that too. Sometimes I have that self-doubt or that internal track, or I look at what is maybe perceived as deficits and trying to reconcile. Do I have to show up with that extra oomph or prove myself? And again, it's that shame, it's that questioning, and it's so hard to be on that island alone. And what I love about these conversations around the fire is that you're creating community. I know that was one of your big takeaways, and I know you have a bunch of them that you want to highlight on today's episode. What are those takeaways and what can people learn and apply, right? Because listening is one thing. So how are you going to use these takeaways and apply it in your life?
So just prior to the takeaways, I want to talk about a common thing that I saw, which was these moments where everything came to a head for people, almost
Mhm.
every time. And Liz Cruz on one of the episodes described these as crucible moments, which are those moments when we meet ourselves in the fire and we get to figure out, who am I in this? So this buildup of these experience tends to lead to a moment like that. It may be, I talked to Lisa Hurley about breakdownish moments or just hitting walls, people walking away from careers in corporate. It manifests in a billion ways. One I want to highlight as far as a crucible moment is Brett D'Alessandro, who's a Marine. He was deployed to Afghanistan and he was on the front lines and he experienced what I can't even imagine. And there's just no way to even fathom. Came back, he was in a very bad place, understandably, including addiction and depression. And he had a moment that turned it all around. It was an encounter with a vet at the side of the road, and he felt compelled in the moment to go get supplies for the vet and bring him back and just give a little bit of comfort and humanity to this gentleman. And that lit a spark in him that became the catalyst for his turnaround and
Mm.
for the creation of Backpacks for Life, which is an amazing not-for-profit that supports veterans. But having been through what he went through, he said, if I went through that trauma, I knew then that I could accomplish anything in my life. It humbled him. It made him a better person. It made him understand his strengths. And it brought out a compassion for other people that he would not have had otherwise. So
Mm.
think about the extremes of being in war and having a crucible moment that you wouldn't trade, right? So many people said that over and over again. As challenging as some of the navigation may have been, and as much as I got to a place of, I'm just done, I've got nothing left, that people wouldn't change the moments and that they come out stronger for it. And I didn't script that. That's just how it kept showing up over and over again. Listeners, if you ever feel like you've reached a breaking point and you have a need to heal, just knowing that you're not alone. And it's in so many episodes. Lisa Hurley, Sandy Casano, Liz Cruz, Caramelli Faye, Ruth Rathblott, Farrah Hudson Brown, Lilith Electra, Brett D'Alessandro, Eduardo Placer, me. You're not alone. And that's,
Mm-mm.
I think, so important for people to know. Now, getting to your point about takeaways. So how do we go about accessing the strength, turning the corner, right?
Yeah.
And there were some definite themes there. One of them was really about taking small steps. Ruth talked about the small step of hiding her hand one day and how that led to 25 years of hiding. And it's almost like quicksand, right? The further in you get, the further in you go. And how do you, after whatever amount of time it is that the stories unfold, how do you then start to untangle that and work your way back out? And it's small steps, right? Ruth said
Mhm.
she reached out to, found one person she could share with.
Yeah.
And that was the beginning of unhiding for her. Back to Brett, he says, start small. Don't run a marathon. Run a half a mile, walk for 10 minutes, just get outside and move. Indigo Avasov really probably described it the most poetically. Our bodies instinctively tell us to turn from moments that scare us.
Mm.
Lilith Electra talked about this too. And the opportunity to take baby steps and lean into those scary moments in self-gentle ways. And as you do that and you take one small step and you kind of like, oh, I'm still okay. You're like, all right, I feel good about that. And then you do it
Yeah.
again, one more small step, one more small step. That's when you start to be able to realize your strength, come out from underneath the fear, reconnect to yourself a bit, and build muscle memory, right? The mental fitness coaching that I do is all about these baby steps and rewiring neural pathways and creating the infrastructure for ourselves to re-access the muscle when we need it.
That's something everyone that is listening to your podcast can really relate to, right? Whether we're allies or we've been marginalized or underrepresented, that theme of small steps when we are facing challenges or facing self-doubt or fear or exhaustion. It's sometimes when I hit that exhaustion from whatever, it's like, okay, what can I do that moves me like 1 degree closer, or just choose one thing today, like that I can just focus on to help me get in the right direction.
Yep.
And so I love that each of your guests, right, they're vulnerably sharing the stories, those moments that basically illuminated a potential different path or different choice they could make to use their strengths in a different way and also heal from the experiences that really rocked them to a core. And then seeing where those small steps have stacked up and then also given them community, given them people. What is another takeaway that you want to highlight for our listeners?
Being grateful and present. And again, these are human things that are important that when we can access them, change everything, including who we are and how we show up in our careers. So my dad, I often describe as his default mood being gratitude. And by the way, doing these episodes with my dad, we did too. The opportunity to do these episodes with my dad are just rank as favorite moments of my life. And he has so much wisdom. He's just an amazing dude. So go check out those episodes. But, he talks about being present. And Mary, from the day you and I reconnected after corporate, being present was such a big part of our conversations. There's nothing you can do about yesterday. There's nothing you can do about tomorrow because it hasn't happened yet, all of those what ifs. And the things that we worry about with tomorrow, 90% of them don't happen anyway. So when we can just be in the moment and be present, we can access so much peace and calm. And it's really the only thing we actually do control is being present in the moment. I want to hear you talk about presence and gratitude real quick because I love hearing you talk about it.
I think it's something that you and I definitely both value, and we both meditate. We both really try to stay present because we've lived in chaos. We've lived in looking back in order to strategically plan our future in the roles that we had, whether we were in corporate or just in family life. You're always trying to learn and grow and evolve, but to some degree, the past doesn't really matter. The present is what we have. And then when we do slow down and look at nature, like one of my favorite things to do to just be present is to just go in nature and check out the birds or look at the ladybug or just watch the wind's effect on a tree branch. It's just so amazing when you think about, oh, you know what? I am good in this moment. I am safe in this moment. And certainly all of your guests really held space for that. I love that gratitude for the hardship that I went through, gratitude for that struggle. Put me in a position to help others, put me in a position to be a voice, put me in a position to realize that I'm so much more than that story that I haven't shared. And think gratitude just really helps illuminate the possibilities and the connections on a much deeper level.
That's so well said. My dad, his gratitude was rooted in his time in Vietnam, and he had a number of experiences where if he had been where he was supposed to have been, he would not be here. And story after story. And there's a lot that happened for him as a result in terms of turning his life in a positive direction, just like you were talking about. One of them is gratitude. When you've had that happen, he's grateful for the sunny days and the rainy days and the ugly things and the beautiful things. And there's just so much power in that. And presence, Caramelli, again, a World Cup captain, and she would feel something funky in the air with her athletes, and she would just say, look, just focus on these 4 cones. That's it. And look at the grass, and the grass is so beautiful. And don't think about the reps we just did. Just be here and just these 4 cones. You talked about the chaos, and for me, it's like the calm and the chaos. Being present and being grateful is the calm and the chaos. And when we can access that, we can change everything. We have the power to choose to do anything in those moments. And that's where our lives and our careers can really start to skyrocket.
Love it. All right. What are some of the other takeaways?
I'm going to bucket joy, love, and kindness. Sandy Casano talked about a lot of times we in life are taught that we should find our purpose. And once we find our purpose in life, we will be joyful. And she flipped it on its head. And I couldn't agree with her more. When we can activate joy in our lives, that's when we will discover purpose. Caramelli talked about serving from the overflow and loving herself so hard that it flowed out to other people and allowed her to be more connected to the athletes that she worked with. Bill Carmody highlighted a song, we'll talk more about music, where one of the themes is I am enough. And there was this line in there that says, always proving my worth only destroys it, that I really related to, right? This always feeling like prove myself, prove myself, prove myself. And when instead you can just love yourself, then you're good. Everything
Yeah.
flows from there. Eduardo sang What I Did for Love. First of all, he's a former Broadway performer, so that was a highlight. And he just talked about love as a revolution and how from our hurt, may we be more open and more receiving of love and the power of accessing that. And Lisa Hurley, I just remember her in her Barbadian accent saying, be kind, be kind, be kind. And when we can be kind first to ourselves, it then extends into kindness to others. So there's that kind of same overflow that Caramelli talked about.
It's really powerful. And this podcast, when you think about it, we're all sitting around a campfire, right? And we are exchanging stories with kindness and love and support and openness. And we are showing up as allies or showing up as individuals that need to feel seen, heard, understood. So that's a beautiful gift that all of you and your guests have really provided in this safe environment. So thank you for that.
Yeah. And the last of the takeaways is really about empathy for others. And Nick Beaulieu did a documentary. He's a white guy from Omaha who did a documentary about the tale of two Omahas that he saw and his inability to reconcile this place that was described as a great place to live, bring your families, to the racial injustice that was very clearly going on. And so that was one storyline. And then the second storyline was, as he was seeing these two worlds unfold, he was also experiencing a bit of a split with his father, who they had a very close relationship. His father evolved in the direction of being a very staunch conservative, and Nick was obviously a liberal activist. And so they went in very different directions in terms of their worldviews. It got to the point where they were barely speaking. And at some point, it got really bad, and Nick's dad was diagnosed also with stage 4 cancer. That brought them back to the table. And Nick had the cameras on, but instead of doing documentary filming, just had a conversation with his dad, the conversation underneath the conversation with his dad, and said, Dad, how does it make you feel that we're so different, that we've come to such different places in our views? And at some point, his dad said, I feel like you don't respect my intelligence because you think I'm wrong. And Nick said, wow, is that because you think I don't trust you? And his father said, yes. And in that moment, Nick realized that there was something so much deeper going on than political views, that under everything, Nick's dad just wanted the love and acceptance of his son and the respect of his son. So he would keep digging in deeper to try to win that love and respect. And it made Nick feel so much empathy toward his dad. And he said in that moment of understanding that bigger picture, that deeper thing that was going on under the surface, changed every conversation that they had going forward from that point. And they were able to start to come back together and reconnect. And so for me, that empathy for others, that ability to, as we let our own walls down, also see a deeper level of other people and get curious about it and connect at a deeper level. That freeing via empathy for others is one of the biggest takeaways that I had.
What a beautiful and brave act and exchange that Nick and his dad had. And when we do let down those walls, when we say, okay, instead of focusing on the different views, where can we come together? What's happening under the surface? And then you start to identify trust and respect and just listening with a different ear and understanding, that empathy that you speak of. It's wow, if we could do that throughout the globe, what a powerful and peaceful environment we could live in. I love that your guests are setting that expectation or planting those seeds for us to follow, to say, you know what, maybe there's a different approach so that we can come together versus have the divide. And I think the divide it's so hurtful for so many of us. And so I love the visual of bringing down the walls so that we can come together. And that is done in large part through empathy.
Yeah, for sure. And when you think about our careers, the first part is doing the work internally so that we can show up fully. And it's a two-way street, right? You also have to be surrounded by people and an environment that supports you, where you feel seen, where you feel safe. So that's really where allyship came in. In terms of guests, we had LGBTQ plus guests. We had Black, Asian, trans, disabled, neurodivergent, veterans, Polynesian, gender fluid, Gen Z, and allies were a big part of it, right? So you start to think about empathy. It brings us full circle into the allyship. We had Amy Bobchak, who's a buddy of mine and a mentor, and we had this conversation about, so you see something unfolding, go back to that Lisa Hurley example. You see something unfolding, and I've done it. I've held back in those moments because I'm afraid of making a mistake. And Amy and I talked about, it's just so important to step into the ring. You may not understand everything going on in the ring. You may think maybe I'm going to make a mistake, but the biggest mistake you can make is to do nothing. If you do something with love and openness and kindness and just the desire to support another person, chances are you're not going to go wrong. Lisa Hurley said, if you're okay with me being harmed, that means you would probably be okay harming me yourself. Again, that inaction is you're participating in their harm by doing nothing. So always feeling empowered to step in and not feeling like you have to have it all figured out, but just that you're needed. And Bill Carmody talked about, I don't know that I'm going to say the right thing, but I know that something needs to be said. And you can even quote unquote apologize up front, right? I might mess this up, but I feel compelled to support this person in this moment. Do the math in the room if it's a corporate environment, and if you see that someone's outnumbered and getting their voices quieted, there's an opportunity there, right? That's a moment where you can jump in. And I think the last thing I want to say about allyship, and maybe more than any quote, what I feel like summarizes what I hope this podcast is again from Nick Beaulieu. He becomes close to an activist in the Black community in Omaha. The gentleman's name is Leo Lewis II. And early on, because Nick's a white guy exploring racial divides, he asked Leo how he felt about that. And Leo said, shared experiences change the world. And for me, that's what I hope this podcast is. And Leo was saying, we might not know each other fully yet. We might not know everything about each other, but the way that will happen is by getting into a space together and having the real conversation. That's where connection happens. That's where the walls come down, the uncomfortable conversations, the conversations under the conversation. That's where we learn the stories. That's where we start to just connect and get inspired and see each other's humanity. And that's it. That's the power. When you can do that, you can show up as your best self, and you can be powerful in your life, and you can be powerful in your career.
I love it. I love it. Okay. Well, thank you so much for this amazing season 1 and the season 1 recap. And listeners, don't worry. Shanti Joy Gold and Stories We Haven't Shared are coming back full force September 18th. So you can look forward to season 2. Shanti, what can they expect in season 2?
The one thing that I will say that will be back for sure is it's my podcast, so there will be music. Check out the playlist on Spotify. That's been a lot of fun. I feel like music, like storytelling, really gets to our humanity. And it's been so fun to see the range of songs that people would put in a time capsule for all times. So anything from pop to classical and everything in between. It's a ride. So check out the playlist. I'm just going to take a little time to let it all marinate. If I can fan the flames in even more powerful ways and expand the circle of people by the campfire, then I want to give the space to allow that to happen.
Awesome. So listeners, during this little break and reset, tugging on your heartstrings, if you have conversations that you want shared more globally so that we can change the world together, if you have just an interest in a particular subject or audience, or there's a career situation that you're trying to work through, please reach out to Shanti, share your story so she can be mindful of how to craft season 2. And then just get ready for some more really good campfire stories, connection, empathy, finding your people, love and kindness, like just so much goodness. Thank you for bringing this all to light in this powerful season 1.
Thank you. And can you tell us really quickly how it's possible that you've done 248 episodes of your True Stride podcast?
You know what? I'm very fortunate where I have some awesome listeners. I call them Striders, and they keep showing up every week. Every week we go on what I call Wise Walks. And Wise Walks are really self-reflection topics and questions where we pause and reset and say, you know what? All of the answers are within us, right? We know what our true stride is. We know when we are in it and we know when we're not. And so these Wise Walk self reflection episodes just help us sense our own heart driven alignment. And so the only reason I keep going is because the Striders out there keep sharing their stories with me, helping me to see where they're feeling the need for community. And just like you said, having community for all of us rallying around each other and then just helping us move forward in a better way, knowing better. It just, I don't know. It's worth it.
Yeah, I kind of joke I'm an overachiever, and I'm trying not to think too much about the fact that you're at episode 248. But it was in talking about podcasting with you that I became immersed in this idea of doing a podcast to talk with you so openly over time in a way that made me inspired to give this a go myself. And knowing that you could actually do it, just the doing of it in addition to the inspiration, it's the only reason that this season happened. So I am grateful for you in all of the ways. And thank you so much for being here with me today. Again.
I'm grateful to be a part of this podcast. It's powerful and it is changing lives. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, everyone. That brings this episode and season of Stories We Haven't Shared to a close. I believe stories are our humanity waiting to be shared, and listening makes it possible. Thanks so much for being here by our virtual campfire today. Until next time, and thank you so much again to Mary Tess Rooney. Take care. See you for season 2. Bye.
Season 2. Peace out.
Peace out.